to everyone for joining us, for signing in tonight. Obviously, a massive thank you to Carly and Nikita, and of course to Katie for co-hosting. So just as a few words and a bit of background on the group, on myself and this evening. So my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of the London Java community and also run RecWorks, which is a tech recruitment company. So here at RecWorks, we try to find ways that recruitment can be a force for good in the tech industry beyond just getting people jobs. And it all came about years and years ago when I started noticing and realizing that we were, as recruiters, at the heart of the industry, in that we spent all day, every day talking to different developers and employers, graduates and people relocating into to London in this same space. And I just wondered if we couldn't use that position to help people better, to serve people better, just to do more interesting things than just connecting people and talking to people about jobs. So over the last 12 years, that's been what we've been about. We've been experimenting with bringing people together around mentoring, around learning, career development. Like working in this same space means you get to watch people's careers as they unfold and see how some people skyrocket to the top and other people do it over a long period of time. And we started looking at the trends in what the people that went up quickly did and whether we could help other people follow similar paths. So that's what we're about doing at the moment, and that's kind of what tonight is all about. So most recently, we've set up a small group called Aspiring Speakers, and the idea is to bring together people that are on a path that would like to improve their speaking skills in general, and people that can see some of those benefits. So we run fortnightly lightning talks events, and we run a few other events through the month, which are intended not necessarily for first-time speakers, but for speakers that are working their way up to the conference circuit. So that's really what tonight's all about. Everything that we do is all powered by recruitment, so that's where any of the revenue comes from. So if you're looking or thinking about looking or you're hiring, or for whatever reason, then feel free to look at LinkedIn, come and find us afterwards, and yeah, more than happy to help. Anyway, on to tonight, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Nikita Koselev, who's going to be speaking on language studies. So Nikita describes himself as just an ordinary IT person working in the back office and is mostly working on further improvements of existing systems. So Nikita, when you're ready.
So yeah, hi guys. So there's a small story behind this talk that a few weeks ago I was helping people with JavaScript course, which I also don't know, but some people know less. And there was a question like, which kind of questions can we ask in this group? And I told them that any questions, as to me, you can ask me how to study English language. And apparently there were like 20 people asking questions how to study English language. And after the third or fourth one-to-one session, I collected some notes. So let's start from here then. So there's a saying in Russian and I think in English that you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. And I think it's very wrong and outdated. And even if we don't check the docs and the docs are doing fine. So there was a talk with Venkat some time ago on LJC. And I think we spent probably, after that talk, we spent probably an hour speaking on how to learn and stuff. So some of the ideas will be coming from people like Venkat. So my name is Nikita. I enjoy traveling and raising my small child. I wish I could afford and spend all time with him, but not yet. But I'm enjoying one of my hobbies is changing nappies. It's actually quite cool, so I actually like it. So here's my LinkedIn, and slides will be a mix of Spanish and English. Sorry. So about myself, so I come from an extremely poor background as to your rates. At some point, for example, my mother couldn't afford like $5 boots because that was too much for our family. So if I can do something, then most people can do something. And I don't have any talents in English or other languages. So in 1997, at first school, I had like 4 out of 5, and then I was transferred to another one, and I got 2 out of 5. And that kind of made me think, but it's improved. to like 80%. But in 2004, when I went to UK, I realized that I cannot understand people. Like when they're speaking directly to me and being polite, I cannot really understand what they're talking, even if I know the even if I know the words. I once spent 3 minutes explaining that I need the soap box because the person cannot understand that soap box is a soap box. There's some difference. So since 2010, I've been living in London, and initially I couldn't understand people in London. For example, Jamaican accent. I can understand it now, but yeah. So there's a guy called Maxim Dorofeev, and his videos are mostly in Russian, but he's got a degree in acoustics from physical science of acoustics, and he was working on creating test systems for testing Boeing software, and also in Kaspersky. And currently he specialized in psychology of the IT guys. And unfortunately, his talks are, the ones I've seen, they were in Russian, but anyway. So this guy says that we should take procrastination as a gift. And when something doesn't work out, so for example, you want to learn Spanish or Russian or English, doesn't matter, and you keep putting it aside, there might be a reason. So you might want to start asking yourself 5 why questions, like why do you need English, or let's say Russian language? Okay, to get better salary. Why do you need better salary? Are you sure it's the only way? So you need to, basic first step is in studying languages is to make sure you really need it, or at least you really like the process. So because you can save yourself a ton of time. For example, I started studying Japanese at some point, and it went well, but it wasn't needed. And when resources became limited, I realized that it wasn't the smartest move. Maybe I will come back to Japanese later. So yeah, so you should, when studying foreign language is not working out for you, you should think, is it laziness or procrastination? Because the treatment is very different. Okay, so usually I start asking people, why are you learning language, or why do you want to learn it? It might be career, it might be access to information, obviously English, but Spanish as well. Not everything is translated, and sometimes you might prefer to listen to it in Spanish, I guess. Brain exercise. It has been scientifically proven that if you're studying languages, Alzheimer will hit you at least 5 years later. So I would prefer to be hit a bit later and have some fun along the way. So I haven't yet seen a single stupid people in IT, a single stupid person in IT. Everybody is quite smart, so like very smart. And when a smart person is failing, then I don't think it's the person. So it's also many people tell me that I cannot learn the language, but they don't even think like which part of the language are you struggling with. So is it just vocabulary, speaking, understanding, grammar? So you need to understand what exactly is failing. So you also need to understand that the trick of comparing yourself to Bill Gates, it's not wise, because when you start investigating which resources he had at his disposal, with all the brain and smart and so on, and nice family. So he had nice family, he had nice support, he has extremely nice education. His mother knew quite experienced people. So maybe a person living in Zimbabwe and trying to learn French, maybe he will have slightly different problems than myself. So there will be no silver bullet solution for us. So you need to think about your resources, you need to think about your time, and also time in the day when you can do studies. You need to think about your environment, and you need to think about your interests also in life, because as you'll see, I'm trying to combine things I like with things which are useful. And sometimes it works. So there, I will show later, but try not to use your willpower to learning the language. Not because it won't work, but because willpower is extremely limited resource. I will talk about it later, but and also try not to go too fast. I will later show you my streak in Duolingo. It's over 500 days on, and some of it is on Spanish, but 300 or maybe 300 days are lost because I was going too fast. So I wasn't studying, I was getting those achievements. It's cool, but I cannot use achievements to talk to people. And please understand that there's nothing wrong to this. Everybody can learn any language. Yeah, I think any language, maybe assembly code. No, any language. I'll explain why. So that's willpower about versus habit. The problem with willpower is that it burns out, and it burns out fast. And when you burn out your willpower resource, you won't be able to use it for things which are urgent or which are like critical. Everybody knows that physical exercise is often good, and maybe most of us could do 10 push-ups in the morning or diet a little bit, but try to use your willpower each day. And this is a really nice book. It's called In the Habit: Introduction to Changing Our Behavior. It's on Audible. And basically, one of the major ideas in this book is that if you create a habit, if you work on creating a habit, instead of using a willpower, they mention several tricks, but basically the idea is that it's better to do it daily. It's better to study Spanish daily than go on 2 weeks course to Madrid once a year. And there's misunderstanding. Some people think it's around 2 months. It's not. The studies show that it's from 2 months to 268 days, I think, to create a habit. And even on a bad day, try to do at least 1 minute of Spanish. Just open your Spanish book and close it. That will be enough. It's better than nothing, and it will create a habit. And try to unload the things which are stopping you from that before this day. So the book should be there, or the tools should be there. So it works. I cannot tell you the whole book, the whole like 6 hours book in 5 minutes, but it's a really nice read on human psychology. So I'm using Duolingo as a habit. I'm not using Duolingo to study languages. It might sound, I really don't like Duolingo for language. It's not helping myself. It's helping some people, I guess, but not myself. But it's good. They have this nice streak, and I can. They have some good parts. They have stories in Spanish where they talk to you in Spanish, and periodically they translate some words. And these are real life stories. It will be about farmer who was growing geisha coffee and how poor he was, or it will be about let's say transsexual in Latin America and how he was fighting for the rights, or it might be about female leaders. They have talks about real people. It's on Duolingo in their podcast. You can check. And obviously, you can use meetups and YouTube. So there are meetups, for example, in Hebrew on Java. So you can join there if you're studying Hebrew or any other language. So why I think you are not the problem. So if 3 years old Japanese child can speak Japanese, and when people are starting to tell you that child brain is flexible, I think that's one of the main excuses. Not exactly. It's not child brain. Sorry for touching my face. I have an allergy. Sorry, guys. It's not, I'm lying. Not always. Let's say that by the age of 4, Japanese child had listened to Japanese from native speakers for 10,000 hours. And let's say somebody studied Japanese for 2 hours per week with bad tutorials in unorganized way. So basically, grown-up adult, we don't have 10,000 hours to learn the language. But the difference between us and Japanese child is that our brain is capable of using abstractions, and we are better in structuring information. So actually, we can learn it more efficiently. Maybe not the pronunciation, there are different tools for that, and I haven't used them, as you can see, but you can use abstractions and knowledge from other areas. For example, English language or French, they will help you studying Spanish. Or for example, I think I'll show this book later, but for example, there are systems for learning Japanese kanji, which is Japanese alphabet. So those, okay, multiple thousands of characters depending on what you need. But Japanese child will be learning them like fish, table, and this order. But grown-up will be learning them in a structured way because he knows the abstract ideas which child cannot really grasp. So this is a very good, extremely good book on kanji, and it's also very good in showing you how a proper approach can bring results. So in this book, kanjis, they were ordered in a way which, how they're actually related and which makes them memorizable. And this is, I'll try to use this one. Oh, sorry, let's see if I can copy link address. That's where IT comes. So it's important to remember that we are IT people, and not many language teachers are IT people. So they are not aware of the tools you're using. They don't have your Googling skills and stuff. So this tool, for example, it shows you the connections between kanji. So the problem with kanji for myself was that they're too similar. I can understand 1, 2, 3, they're just lines. But when it's shellfish versus the employee, I start struggling. So for example, this tool, and there's a story about Python, I think, behind this tool, but this tool shows you how is your kanji related to other kanjis and makes spots. So you search for employee and you can relate it in your studies to, I don't know, this one, which is injured, hurt, disadvantage. Not sure why employee is part of injured, hurt, in disadvantage, but this way it allows you to try for yourself if this tool helps you. Okay, let me try to. So for example, for Spanish language, I'm using Spanish Dict with extremely good vocabulary. And what is even better, I'll show now. Don't limit yourself with the tools. So for example, Spanish Dict, if I mejor, yeah, if I check what is mejor, I will have an examples, and later I'm using them in studies. I don't care about a single word. I care about growing a habit of studying Spanish, and I care about building a network of neurons, two-way neurons in my brain. So if I'm studying a word, I'm studying it in conjugation with others. So basically, the idea is don't limit you with the tool. If the tool doesn't work for you, either you're using it wrong or the tool is not so good. Google, check, it always changes. So yeah, the materials you're using, they matter a lot. So probably it's not a good idea to study French on the book which was issued in 1912. So probably you should check the latest one, because although teachers don't know computers that well, they're improving actually quite fast. So one of them told me that, you know what, writing down the words doesn't work because your memory doesn't work. It's extremely inefficient. So stop wasting your time on writing down words in English. It's just slow and you won't remember it. So now we're coming to the spaced repetition. And that's why I stopped using Duolingo. And that's because I started using Duolingo, maybe. The idea of spaced repetition is that it's very important not to roll back. As long as you don't roll back in learning something new, be it JavaScript or Spanish, and you learn something new, you will be moving forward all the time. If you're learning Spanish once a year, then actually you'll spend a lot of time just coming back to the position you started from. So that was my mistake with Duolingo, that I went very fast, for example, with German and Spanish. I got the achievements, but actually, while I was learning something new, I was already, I didn't remember anything about where I studied. And with spaced repetition, it's a system when you have this deck of cards, basically. Maybe you used it in school, but two sides cards. And on one of them, you write, I don't know, some English word. Or let's say you're studying Japanese. So you're writing, I don't know, each one, right? And you're writing each semicolon, and you write some sentence where one is used. And on the other side, you're using the English translation. And you make a stop of these cards. And you check only those cards which you don't remember. That's the idea of spaced repetition. The cards which you remember, you check less and less. So my system won't actually ask me how to say un hombre, a man, for maybe 700 days, because it's quite sure I know how to say man. So let's not waste my time. So that's what pushing people away from studying languages is relearning stuff you actually know and losing time there. So, but the problem with those cards is that it's tedious, it's hard to create them, and it just takes time. It's not convenient in the 21st century. So there's a approach called Anki, and there's a free Anki web, and there's a free software for that stuff. And please try it. And you can try it on many levels. You can check YouTube for videos on Oxford doctors and Oxford top students, medical students using this stuff to learn their stuff. You can inject CSV files and so on. So there's a degree of programming you can use with this thing. You can use GitHub to store your backups or something. So, okay, time for Anki demo. So that's my deck, but the deck is basically the deck of those cards. But the idea is that you can actually inject decks from the decks pre-created by people for you, but I create them myself. So I have Duolingo, which is tailored just for me. I'm studying it from other sources, which other people use, like teachers, books and stuff. But my secret is spaced repetition and habits. So the idea is that, we'll just go back. The idea is that I have 208 cards to repeat. I was a bit lazy in the last days. I have 100 new, but those numbers are high, artificially high. Normally it's only like 20 per day and 108. And when I'm studying, I'm basically answering. So this part I created, and this part is the answer. So if I say it's easy, it won't ask me the same card in the 4 next days.
Real quick, Nikita, are we supposed to be seeing your demo or a blank screen?
I thought I'm sharing my screen, no?
I think you're just showing the presentation. I think all of us probably just see a blank screen.
Oh, that's how it works. Well, 1 second. I'll do new share and I'll use, yeah, this one. Apparently Zoom, is it better now?
I think so. Yep, we can see.
Yeah, so Zoom is sharing windows, not screens. Okay, cool. So basically that's the example of a card, 2 sides. I'll go a bit faster now. And the idea is that when you click this button in below, you specify, will you repeat it now, or you will put it aside for 4 days. And I think maximum is 10,000 days. And the benefit is that you can actually use your keyboard 1, 2, 3. So in Duolingo, you need to, at least to pronounce this plugin, or you need to type. Here, the speed is the key. I don't want to waste my time proving that I know stuff. I don't know, I don't. And now I will go back to my, and now I will go back to my presentation, and I will try to fly through the remaining slides, because there's, I'm not the only one today. So you need to think about your brain. So Anki and spaced repetition is good, but also you need to find a way to listen, to learn to listen, to create neural networks. So you might find podcasts or anything and just listen. That will teach you to recognize the language, because initially it's white noise to your brain, but then it learns to recognize the sounds. It creates the neural links. So I was learning English with Robert Jordan. So when I was first, I read it in Russian, and then I was listening it in English. I couldn't understand anything, but I kind of understood when book I am. So when Mr. Rand, and eighth time I listening to the book, when he takes sword out of a scabbard for the eighth time now, I kind of understand that the only place he can take scabbard from, sword from, is this thing which is used to store the sword. So it helps. And if you know the book before, you don't need to understand everything. And the book is good, and the English language there is beautiful. And don't be alone there. Find a teacher. It's cheap. It's much cheaper than you might think. And use him to answer your questions. Don't probably let him teach you as much, but come with questions and ask, because there are many books, but books don't answer silly questions. Yeah. So basically, that's my lazy approach. So my Spanish is not getting great, but maybe let's say I was studying it at work and I was studying it at Duolingo, but when somebody told me, hola, ¿qué tal? Which is, hi, how are you? And I couldn't understand it, because in Duolingo, they don't ask ¿qué tal in the beginning. They didn't. And because I wasn't a very good student as well, so I became a bit more proactive, and I started creating course for myself with Anki, using ideas from my teachers. And if you Google Anki on YouTube, you'll find a lot. And also for those who use iPhones, Anki is £20 or $20. But if you open their website, functionality is the same and it's free. Everybody else can use it for free from the Androids. So sorry, guys. Any questions?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nikita. It's really good to know about these resources, especially with just how, flexible, I guess, everybody is these days, especially in Europe. I'm from the US, but all of my coworkers, I don't think there's more than 2 people from the same place. So really important to expand your horizons a little bit. We have had a couple questions come through. So the first one that I have for you is, with so much voice recognition and AI, how should we support different languages and accents?
What exactly I can tell of some applications of voice recognition and AI.
Sure.
I'm aware that people who want to improve their pronunciation, there are programs which write here, which help you to improve. And also currently I started thinking about discrimination from the point of AI. I remember there was a problem with face recognition. I'm not sure if it was Microsoft or somebody, but basically they had guys who looked the same from the point of, okay, I'm not very good in racist terms, but they looked the same, they belonged to the same background. And AI became racist. So now I'm thinking that, let's say we created a program which is trying to find keywords from somebody speaking on 911, trying to create meta info, and we didn't train this AI properly. And it does discriminate people who speak with an accent, and they will get delayed help. So if that answers the question. So because I'm involved. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, that's from me, from Magli. And I just wanted to say, yeah, that's really exactly kind of the point I was making, especially I think you as a non-English first language speaker, you must find it challenging living in an English world, and how technology sort of
Not really. I don't find it challenging.
Doesn't help people who don't.
But I'm aware of people who find, and on the side note, I'm a part of Women Leadership Network in my company, and racism and discrimination by gender, they piss me off, and discrimination by language as well. So maybe that's why I'm trying to share. So yeah.
Brilliant.
But that's a different topic.
Great, thanks. And then another one, do you have any recommendations for learning new programming languages, given that
Yes.
you know, it has a lot of
Yep.
parallels? Yeah.
So Mr. Venkat is #1. So when you see his meetups, just go there and then ask questions about education, because as he shared, it was open so I can share. He has a learning disability. So it's much harder for him to learn stuff. And he's Java champion. I think he is. And he's one of the best Java developers out there. If he could, then you can. It's the approach. So Venkat, he's reading 8 books at a time, but he's not reading them. He's swiping them, checking things and trying them. And he spends 20 time on that and 80 time on actually practicing. And there's a website called Exercism.io. I'll try to share. Basically, just one moment. It's maybe one of the best resources I've seen on studies. If you think of HackerRank with a live mentor who will criticize your code, and you will have access to other people's code. And when you check out the exercise, you will check it out with a command line tool, which will create project on the drive with unit tests first. That's exercism. So sometimes I use it, and I've spent like 5 attempts trying to get my hello world in JavaScript through, and people's comments were quite good. So exercism, I always say, and code, but in the right way, with a point in mind. I don't like plural side. It's passive. Education cannot be passive. You are not creating neural links. You are faking the education, and you're wasting time. It's probably go and watch some TV series in English, but that will help your English. But watching somebody coding JavaScript and not trying it, not really. That's the problem with IT books. Reading them don't make you a better developer if you don't use it. Any other questions? It didn't help me, at least.
Cool. Actually, not so much a question, but a comment from me. Some of the resources that you shared, like I think it's called Yandex, they actually have an API library that you can utilize. So if you're truly motivated, you can go learn like a new programming language and use these libraries to learn an actual language as well.
These guys are Google in Russia and Turkey and a few other countries. And their coding exercises, which I just checked on their website, if you check the company's coding exercises, you can tell something about the company. And I like the quality. So yeah, they have tons of APIs.
Cool. Well, did anybody else have questions for Nikita? Awesome. Well, he did share his LinkedIn information, so feel free to connect and ask further questions if you want that way. But I think otherwise, Nikita, if you have nothing else, we can go ahead with Carly's talk. Cool. So Carly today is joining us, Carly Richmond, and she's a senior software engineer at Morgan Stanley, specializing in front-end web development. She regularly shares her passion for agile, UI, and technology on Twitter and Medium. When not focusing on tech, though, she loves cooking, photography, and is partial to a cup of tea or two. And actually, I think she's joining us with a cup of tea today. So I'm very pleased to welcome Carly and have her talk on overcoming software development obstacles.
Thanks very much, Katie. I've actually literally finished it just in the time, but I clearly need a bigger mug then. But let's get started. Welcome everyone, and thanks for sticking around. So for all of us here today, I'm making an assumption that we're all working in IT, building out software or a similar kind of role. And I'm sure what we all find is that overcoming impediments that arise as we build out that software, excuse me, it's just a regular part of our jobs. It's just something we have to deal with. And what I found is through my career from being an entry-level developer to now, the fact that challenges appear as I build out software is simply just part of my job. It's an established certainty. but how I choose to handle them has actually evolved over time. So today, I'm here to share our experiences of using obstacle boards. I'll discuss the initial use case and experiences that we had, along with some of the challenges we found along the way. And I'll leave a portion of time at the end for any questions that pop up as I'm going through, so do keep those handy. Okay, so let's talk. Katie gave an amazing introduction, but let me just clarify a couple of extra things. So I'm also a Scrum Master as well as a senior software engineer. We covered everything about T, and we covered everything about my love of UX, Agile, and other topics. And I also contribute on Twitter and Medium, so if you want to check out some of my thoughts and my resources, just do follow me on there. So through my 9-year career thus far, I've worked on several different products, and I've used various different techniques for managing my time and working with my colleagues. And what I've found is whenever I've worked under a waterfall model, unexpected obstacles are actually quite difficult to handle. Often they appear overnight randomly as if it's some insurmountable wall, and I end up coming in and gazing up thinking, how am I going to deal with this one? And what I found is in waterfall in particular, because you have those upfront analysis and design stages, whenever I got involved at the implementation and testing point, obstacles were a bigger problem because at that point we were stretched thin, and the kind of end goal deadline was the one of the few things that hadn't really been changed yet. So I found that whenever we were trying to handle these issues, it was normally with a combination of panic. We would handle it with things like overtime or adding in additional status meetings, or sometimes just replanning everything altogether, which wasn't ideal. But then over the past 4 to 5 years, things have changed up and I've started practicing a mix of Scrum and Kanban. And what I've observed is that we try to communicate impediments in a slightly calmer fashion. So for those of you that practice Scrum or perhaps participate in some form of daily stand-up, I want you to think about that script that we commonly use to structure our collaborations in that ceremony. So traditionally, I've found that each member of the Scrum team kind of goes in a round robin circle, and we each answer 3 key questions. Firstly, what did I do yesterday that helped the development team meet the sprint goal? Secondly, what am I doing today to help the development team meet the sprint goal? And then also, do I see any impediments that are going to prevent me or the development team from meeting that sprint goal? And it's question 3 that I want to focus on here. So impediments and prevent, those 2 words are very much halting for me. And okay, it's not quite the panicked approach. What I've found is it's more like driving down in your car to a busy crossroads where there's other cars coming up at the other prongs. In Agile practice, what we tend to do in this analogy is we'll slow down, we'll come to a stop, we'll kind of communicate. Obviously in this analogy, it's probably more non-verbal than verbal. And then we will each figure out a way to navigate through to get to our eventual destination. And that's fine, it works, but I think there's a better way with which we can handle impediments as they appear, rather than stopping completely. And with that in mind, I want to change this definition in your minds of what an obstacle is. We should match that of an Olympic hurdler, rather than a stop sign or a wall. And that's important because it means that we can try and identify impediments ahead of time and try and prepare to jump. So if for a moment we compare the female 100-meter hurdle and 100-meter sprint world records, as per the World Athletics website, I'm hoping you'll see why I'm trying to draw this analogy. So currently, Kendra Harrison of the USA holds the female 100-meter hurdle world record. It's 12.20 seconds, and she set that back in 2016. Meanwhile, the 10.49 second 100-meter sprint record, which was set by Florence Griffith Joyner back in 1988, still remains unbroken to this day. So both of these times are mind-bogglingly fast. Pre-COVID, when I was commuting, I'm never going to get to those speeds trying to run for the bus or the train in the morning. But the fact that the hurdle and sprint records are mere seconds apart gives us a good learning point for dealing with obstacles. We should emulate a hurdler here. They're not going to stop in front of an obstacle, try and run around it, or talk to each other to try and figure out what to do. Then looking ahead, getting ready and trying to sail over each hurdle in turn while maintaining a consistent pace. And obstacle boards are a mechanism that we can use to emulate that behaviour and try and deal with the obstacles that come up within our work. So let me get into the nitty-gritty and tell you the story of how we came to use our first obstacle board. So the year was 2019, and as part of the build out for a replacement product, the squad I was working with were consistently struggling with unfinished work at the end of every sprint. So in terms of the team composition, we had the key Scrum superhero roles covered. You had myself, who was your friendly neighbourhood Scrum Master. We had a dedicated product owner who was actually a supervisor in the business domain and therefore a subject matter expert. He knew all the quirks and how the existing system was used. We also had 4 dedicated developers who were responsible for building out new features. Each of them had little experience of working on the existing system, and that system actually had been live for many years, and with a lot of legacy systems had things like limited documentation and a few other factors to consider. And in addition, we also had 3 business analysts who were responsible for supporting the product owner in managing the backlog and also validating and testing the new system against the old one, which was an important thing for us because being a bank, numbers matter. So how did this band of heroes know that, we had a problem with, unfinished work? I could talk about several mechanisms such as burn down or perhaps some other agile metrics, but the easiest way to tell was the fact that at the end of every sprint, our board looked a little bit like this. We have some items in here that are done on the far right, which is great, but we've also got a couple of items that are still in progress. And there was always at least a couple of items that hadn't even been started yet. And this was becoming a problem because it was a consistent view over every sprint. So we just weren't finishing things. So when the team did some digging and some investigation and we reflected on it, we realised that there was some unplanned work going on. So cast your mind back to those validation checks that I talked about before. So what was happening was the business analysts were finding a discrepancy between the old and the new system. And when they found a discrepancy, they would report it to one of the developers and ask them to take a look to see what was driving the difference. And because the developers didn't have that much experience with looking into the old system and they hadn't really worked with it very much, it was taking them quite considerable time to look through the code and try and figure out what was going on. And obviously that then detracted from the stories that we were building out because we hadn't allocated any capacity for doing this additional work. So I mentioned it's a financial system. I've mentioned that accuracy is important. So we needed to do something about this too. We couldn't just ignore it and then keep driving through story after story. So what we agreed to do was reserve some of the team capacity to look at these validations specifically. But that also meant we needed a mechanism to track these impediments too, so that we can make sure we were dealing with them in a timely fashion and that we were addressing all of the ones that came through. So we decided we'll do an experiment. We'll try a few things out and see what happens. So we tried a combination of several things. We tried email, which was daily blasts saying, what kind of impediments had appeared each day. We tried spreadsheets. If anyone's coming from a project management background, you might have an alarm bell going off in your head of, this sounds quite similar to a risk register. I can definitely see that similarity. And sometimes we just sat down together and tried to figure out what was going on, albeit over a phone call because it was a distributed team. But when we scrutinised the results of each of these mechanisms, and also the combination approach too, we found that there were several key challenges that these mechanisms just weren't resolving for us. So firstly, it was really difficult to identify what the key themes were from the distinct examples. And that also meant that we couldn't really stop duplicate items being raised off the back of these obstacles either. Next, the turnaround time in the investigations was perceived to be very slow. And what would happen is you'd have a product owner or business analyst regularly chasing developers, often via email or chat, to try and find out what was going on because it wasn't visible and it wasn't clear. And also, whenever we did need to raise a defect or a story for it, it didn't integrate well into our existing process for capturing stories. It was a manual thing, which made it a bit more difficult. So following this experiment, we realized we needed to find an alternative option that we hadn't tried before. So I want you to cast your mind back to that sprint board I showed you a few slides ago and think about, what if we utilized a similar workflow to track those impediments? That's precisely what the inspiration behind the obstacle board is. It gives you a centralized place to visualize any impediments that the team are facing and allows them to try and address them in order to keep sprinting effectively. It's not a construct that I've made up. I actually found it from doing some research, both out in the big bad world and also within my own organization's intranet. But what I found the more I dug was I'd find plenty of things around the general logistics of how to create a board, or I would find loads of items about general theory of impediment management. And what I really wanted was to see how people were using it and how they got on and what their experiences were. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm talking with you today, so that I can share what I found out with you all here. So we continued with our approach of a reduced velocity, and what changed this time was we created a new board in Jira. Of course, if you're using any other management tools that's similar to Jira or even a physical board, the same technique can work for you too. And then we started adding in our obstacles and tracking them across the board. So let me guide you through an example of how we actually use the board in practice. So we had our 3 swim lanes of to do, in progress and done. And any impediments that were found as part of regular checks could be raised by either one of those business analysts or a developer or any stakeholder at all. It didn't matter as long as it was there. So developers would then pick up the first available item to work on, and they'd communicate that by moving it to in progress and then assigning it to themselves to show who was working on it. And once they had completed their investigation, they'd document all the findings and results on the same Jira ticket. And then as a group, we would decide what to do next. And in practice, one of 3 things normally happened. Either the item was reassigned back to the creator if we perhaps needed more information, or we needed them to kind of sanity check the results, or we determined we didn't need to do anything else with it, and then it was closed and moved into done. Or alternatively, we actually needed to raise a defect in order to try and address this issue. And in that case, we'd convert it to a story and it would go through our usual refinement and prioritization processes, just like any other feature. So that's the practical element of it. How effective did we find it? Well, from a qualitative state, when we had our first retrospective after adopting this board, the initial feedback from the development team, the product owner, and some other stakeholders was really positive. Collectively, they highlighted a few advantages. The state of the investigations was now more transparent because it was really easy to tell what items were being looked at, who was looking at them, and if something wasn't even being looked at all. And since it was a central board, it meant that we had a central state of knowing how many validation issues were floating around out there. Next, it was easy to convert them to new stories if required, because the storyboard and the obstacle board were housed in the same tool. And conversion for us was actually as easy as changing the ticket type. And that meant that any findings that were done as part of the investigations then carried through with the ticket, which was really useful when it came to planning and working out what we needed to do to fix the issue. And then a kind of extension to that idea of it being in Jira was that this was a tool that was common to the workflow of all the major players who were dealing with the obstacles. So developers were already using it for their own work management and release practices. And the product owner and the business analysts were also using it for backlog management, refinement, and planning. So it was a win-win on that side too. So we have good feedback. Do I have any numbers for you to say how effective this was? Well, if I'm going to give you a couple of summary stats this evening, the first one I'll go with is that we had 37 distinct software obstacles raised between the 23rd of May and the 10th of September 2019, which was the main portion of when this experiment took place. And of that portion of obstacles, we remediated 18 of them, which, if you're doing the calculation in your head, is about half. So I'm sure the next question on everyone's minds is, what happened to the other 19? Well, let me glean some insights for you. If we look at the portion of created obstacles versus those resolved, we can see a couple of interesting behaviours with how this group used the board. So you would probably expect to see a big peak at the start. Kind of makes sense if we're translating some obstacles from one mechanism to another. But you'll also see that each peak seems to be mirrored in the resolve portion too. So the developers only really got through a small chunk of these at the start. But then what we found is that the business analysts were also raising any subsequent sets of obstacles in clumps too, rather than having a kind of general stream of items coming through. And then the developers would emulate that behavior, which meant that they only really picked up on the ones that were coming through as newer ones and never really took out this peak. So that's what happened, between May and September. It's now 2020. What happened next? Well, this is where there's a twist in the tale. So at the beginning of July, I went on leave for 6 months. And when I came back, those 19 items were still on that board. Yes. And what had happened was they were still in the same state as well. There was some in progress, there was some that weren't started. And then since then, what I've actually been looking at is trying to glean some lessons so that I could try and either use obstacle boards again or try and learn what aspects of practice could be improved. And since I've kind of performed that investigation and talked to people, I actually have some insights that I'd like to share for anyone who's thinking, I would like to use an obstacle board, but I want to learn from the lessons that Carly's just told us today. Well, here's a few for you. So firstly, think about, does it really need to be separate? Do I need to have my obstacles and my stories separate, or can they commingle together in harmony? So one concern that was raised was that developers found it really difficult to manage collective state of obstacles and stories in two different places, regardless of the fact that they were housed in the same tool. And I can kind of understand that now that I think about it. I've seen that maintaining a collectively accurate state of work on any board, regardless of it being physical, virtual, obstacle, or user story, requires collective diligence on behalf of the entire team. And I found that less experienced or distributed teams can struggle with that quite a lot. So it kind of made sense that they were raising these concerns, that they were seeing this additional procedure as a little bit bureaucratic. And since then, I'm in a new team, and whenever we find obstacles, we raise them directly onto the same storyboard and have everything in one place within our sprint. So if you're wanting to track your obstacles, I suggest, why don't you have one board to rule them all? And that way you have a consolidated state, and it makes it a lot easier to figure out what's going on. Next, it might seem strange to say, but think about what your definition of a blocker actually is, and make sure you take that hurdler analogy in mind as well. Because our definition for this board, for this team, was fixed as those data mismatch issues. So once that wider theme of data validation had been resolved, and the team weren't spending as much time digging into the old system, they didn't see the need to use the board for raising other types of obstacle. Furthermore, as the developers actually gained confidence in the logic of the system, when they did find that occasional issue that popped up, they could quickly identify what the problem was. It wasn't taking up an exorbitant amount of time. And what they found was they would just bypass the obstacle board and go straight to the storyboard instead, which, if you think about it, is a nice optimization in terms of their process. I'm certainly proud of them for doing that. But the thing I'd like to call out is that that team, the team I'm in now, and any other team that I see, that I encounter, or even that I will encounter in the future, we all still find impediments in our work. There are things that still slow us down. And those change and evolve as we grow. So if you're going to use an obstacle board, I suggest you think about what is slowing you down right now, and regularly rethink that to make sure that you can continue using the board to track your impediments. Otherwise, you'll just see it as a short-term solution and you'll stop using it. And the final tidbit I would like to share is make sure that you add it into any working agreement, team norms, or maybe team charters, the word that you've heard. There's certainly different variations that I've heard over the past few weeks. So for us, we'd agreed the experimental use of this obstacle board as part of a discussion. And we discussed the logistics, we tweaked it very slightly at the start, but we never really agreed it together as a norm of the team. It was seen as a temporary measure for these mismatch issues. And because we weren't reevaluating it as a practice, it meant that it was left when we decided we didn't really need it anymore and we didn't think about how else we could use it. Now, I don't know about your groups, but certainly pre-COVID, we were not brilliant at establishing working agreements with how our scrums would function. And it's only been when we've moved to remote working that it's become a necessity. So the usage of an obstacle board is definitely the perfect addition when you're drafting out these norms. So if you want to use a board, or even that hybrid approach that I talked about before, do think about adding it to your working agreement too, so that you can preserve the usage. So why don't I summarize the key lessons I've shared today? So firstly, software obstacles are not something that stop us in our tracks. They're something that gradually slow us down. And it's important to try and eliminate them as quickly as possible to ensure that the team can keep sprinting together. Visualizing these impediments on an obstacle board or a hybrid can help you with tracking and addressing these impediments as they arise, and also gives you a central collaboration point to communicate with all other relevant stakeholders. And also be mindful of those key adoption lessons that I shared today. So firstly, think about whether you really need a separate board. Can you combine those two together? Think about that common blocker definition, and also make sure that you reevaluate it over time, so that as your team learns and grows, so does your definition of an obstacle. And finally, make sure that you put the agreed usage into any form of team charter, norms, or working agreement to make sure you preserve the usage going forward and that you all agree exactly how you want to use the board. I do wish you luck on your journey using obstacle boards or any form of impediment management that you've gleaned from my talk today. Thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions now if Katie's got them ready. Otherwise, do reach out to me afterwards. My handles are on the last slide there as well. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Carly, for really awesome talk. Really enjoyed that. So we have a few questions, and if anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So I'll go ahead and start off. Were there any impediments that you were, sorry, we'll go with the second one while I reread.
Okay.
What is the cost of ignoring the obstacles that you face?
Well, I guess the cost here for these particular ones where we weren't going to have a system that was going to be usable. I mean, I think if you're not overcoming, it depends what the obstacle is really. If the obstacle is slowing you down and you're not able to communicate that effectively, you're potentially leaving yourself in a situation where, your stakeholders are going to feel a bit aggrieved and that, they're not really understanding what's slowing you down. And then they're going to start asking you some awkward questions about where their features are. So I think definitely it can affect relationships as far as building out features for clients is concerned. It can also possibly affect relationships within the team as well. Especially if maybe you've got the same ones popping up all the time, or the same person is handling the same thing all the time. So by being transparent with what's slowing everyone down, you can kind of all band together and help out. Obviously, in this particular instance, because it's data mismatch issues, the thing that would have suffered was we wouldn't have had a product that would have been usable because it wouldn't have been able to be used for the function it was designed for. But if we're talking about more general things, like maybe you've got delays in getting hardware or something, that's potentially going to have an impact on those relationships if you're not able to communicate the reasons for delays, for example.
And are the obstacles that you're tracking effectively just defects on the stories you're working on from your findings?
I wouldn't say they were defects, just because there was also a couple of examples that we encountered that were to do with slight differences in how the system worked across different regions. And there was different client expectations with how they expected something to work. And because this was a global tool that we were building, it meant that we had to kind of get a uniformed agreement of how certain things were working. So sometimes we would find that it was a defect. You're absolutely right. And then, of course, it makes sense for it to go through the storyboard. But in some other instances, it was actually around user education of how the current system worked or how we maybe wanted to tweak things going forward. So it definitely wasn't as black and white as they're all defects.
Okay. And how do you incorporate these obstacles into your sprint planning process? Are you assigning, are you assigning them to somebody, and do you include the story points of the obstacle during planning?
So that we didn't do. What we did was we reserved a portion of our capacity, and because it was important at that time, I think it was, I can't remember the exact number, but I think we tried to allocate about a portion of about 40 to 50% because that was really important. So we didn't plan each investigation in turn. That did cause, now that I think about it, a couple of potential issues, because it means that you've not really got any form of kind of idea of how long each investigation is going to take. And that was an issue as well, because it meant that there was still a potential for derailing the story development too, because you weren't time boxing it. So one other kind of lesson that might be useful to share off the back of that question is, if you're wanting to use this for, you use an obstacle board, I don't necessarily know if you need to plan them, but it might be worth thinking about how long you're willing to spend to remediate it until you kind of acknowledge that you've got a problem, and then you either escalate or you try and find some other way to rectify it. So that's definitely a good point. Because these things are not, it's normally meant to deal with unexpected issues, I think it would be difficult to plan for them if you were using it for more general things. But certainly it's probably good to think about that idea of limiting or time boxing and knowing which point you really need to escalate and get help.
Sure. All right. And would you use the board to record all the blockers and impediments that your team raised?
We only did the validation issues, and I think that's a missed opportunity, because there's other things, as I said, that slow that team down even now, but we're not using the board in that way. We're tending to think about obstacles in a very specific way in terms of blocking particular business features, but we could think about other forms of impediments if you really think about it, like if we have delays getting any hardware that we needed, or maybe we've got a delay because of, another team dependency or something. I think we could definitely expand on using the board a lot more. And that's where that lesson of, reevaluating impediment definitions more regularly comes in, because what slows you down and stops you changes over time. It's not always the same thing. So it's a very good point.
Cool. Well, that's all the questions that we have queued up right now. So if anybody else has questions, throw them in the chat. But they've been really awesome questions. Thanks, Carly, for all the time answering them, and everyone for asking these questions. So, okay. Well, looks like that's it for now. But of course, they can always reach out to you offline. Cool. Thanks, Nikita and Carly, for your great presentations. Really, really great ones. So anything else that you guys want to add before closing out?
No, just thank you for listening. Definitely appreciate the time.
Cool. Well, in that case,
Just 1 second. I'll put the website link, exorcism.io, to the chat so people can see how to improve their coding skills. Because
Awesome.
that's the best out there.
Very cool. All right. In that case, do you want to throw that in before we end, or did you already do it? Sorry. Nikita, did you?
Yeah, it's done. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, in that
No
case, everyone have a good night. Thanks again for joining us.
Have a great night. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.